Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. If you are listening, also thank you. Make sure you also don't forget to go on my YouTube. I am on my quest, my ad-free quest to get 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you are not subscribed, please make sure you subscribe. If you are listening on the podcast, please make sure you go click the show notes for the YouTube channel, hit subscribe. It's ad-free, so no interruptions. I think this topics are way too important. This one especially. This one, I kind of wanted to make one on how a site should interact with patients. Even like what kind of packaging you should or what the pitch really is for a study without knowing the study, just because I feel like a lot of our job as coordinators, as site owners, are to educate people. And before we even start educating about a particular study, we're always educating about what research is. And then my videographer Daniel kind of told me, yeah, why don't you do one on what is clinical research, like for the general public, because we have a hard time explaining what you do to other people. So I think I can combine the two, because if you're a research professional, like if you're a CRA, send this to your sites. And if you're a site, try to maybe consider incorporating some of this into your communications with your patient. And then I'm just going to give a little bit of best practices for when we talk to patients. So generally, when does the opportunity come up for educating patients? For us, it comes when we're out in the community at a community event. Maybe we set up a booth at the local jazz fest here in Yuma during the winter. I think every Thursday evenings there's like a jazz fest, and one of our coordinators, she has a family-owned restaurant in a prime location, so we get a lot of foot traffic. It makes sense we set up a booth. We inevitably get asked, well, what do you guys do? What is clinical research? And I think that's a good place to start. And whenever you get a patient, maybe a lead, a pre-screened patient, or somebody that clicked on an ad, or maybe your physician, your PI tell you, hey, Dan, like my PI does all the time, hey, Dan, I got this name for you. I just saw him or her a couple hours ago. Give them a call. They want to do the study, but they have questions. You always end up having the same conversation, and it's educational. It's, what is a clinical trial? Is it safe? Who regulates it? What are my rights? And to do this properly, I mean, it's like a 4-hour thing. Like there's even some industry professionals that don't know all this stuff. So you got to distill to a patient what is important for them on a macro level, meaning before you even get into the specific study, just what is important on a macro level of what clinical research is. So I always start with good clinical practice, and I always start with Dr. So-and-so is supervising this study. It's being done at our clinic as well as however many clinics there are. And here's how a clinical trial works. And then we'll get into like what phase it is. So I'll usually explain the phases. I talk about preclinical, then I talk about animal studies, then I talk about first in human, where they try to find maximum tolerated dose. Then we talk about pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, but in a simplified version, to where I kind of take them on this journey of like, this is from a lab to today in this clinic. This is where this investigational product, this is the journey it took. And once they see how much studying is actually involved and what kind of data is being collected, it kind of opens their eyes a little bit, because most assume studies are done, but they have no idea how, and they don't realize it's being done in their own communities, like here in Yuma or anywhere else. So I usually walk them through this process, and this is like a 1 to 2 minute thing, but I talk about by the time this drug is already at our clinic, we already know what the dose is therapeutically, what we believe the dose to be. We already know it's safe at that range because they do healthy volunteer studies where they find the maximum tolerated doses. So in these studies, they do single ascending, multiple ascending doses, and they figure out what's the maximum tolerated dose, and then they take it down to where nobody experiences crazy side effects, if any. And then they say the hypothesis is, okay, is it now therapeutically efficacious here? And that's where we get into phase 2, where is it therapeutically efficacious in the short term on people with that actual condition, not just healthy volunteers. And then if it gets to phase 3, we already know that it possibly is and that it's still safe. And usually phase 2 studies are a couple months long, maybe 2 to 6 months long. Phase 3 studies are longer, 6 months to up to 6 years sometimes, and then even post-marketing studies, observational studies. So I walked them through all of this, and it's helpful to know wherever we are with the IP on whatever particular study that they're in. We kind of focus more on that type of phase. So if the drug's already in phase 3, I walk them through phase preclinical and then phase 1 and phase 2. So I say, as you can see, by the time it gets to phase 3, now we're ready to test this out on thousands of people instead of hundreds. And patients that have the condition, let's say it's hypertension, we've already studied it on them, and the drug company is spending billions because they think the results from phase 2 were good enough to invest in a longer term study. If they didn't think it was good enough after phase 2, they wouldn't invest money in a phase 3 study. So safety is the first thing they clear, and the second thing they clear are efficacy. And then they do exploratory endpoints too. So this is like maybe a 5-minute conversation by now. And then I get into their Bill of Rights, and I get into good clinical practice, and I get into how, at least in our case, because we don't do oncology studies and we don't do things where we bill patients' insurance at all. I know for some indications that's not the case, but in our case, it's always been this way. We cover the cost of everything. If you ever get a cost for something out of pocket, we'll cover it. You actually get paid to participate. This is how much you get paid. The majority of our patients are amazed at that. And I tell them this is IRB approved. I get into what an IRB is. I let them know about the ethics committees. I let them know that before every protocol, even if it went from phase 2, now it's a phase 3, there's a new protocol that needs to be created, that an IRB or ethics committee, independent review board, has to review whether the study is ethical enough for people with this condition to participate. Then I go a step further and let them know our PI and our staff, because this is true, curate what we believe is most appropriate for our patient population and our community, because we don't say yes to every study. And then I let them know, hey, some visits, they have 8-hour visits, and when we don't think that's appropriate, we say no to those studies. Or sometimes we get study offers for drugs that our PI is maybe not a fan of, or doesn't think that it would be beneficial to the patients, even if an IRB approved it. And so we say no to those. So, and this especially is helpful if the patients also see the physician as their clinician. But even if they don't, they see that we go above and beyond what the minimum requirement is. Then we talk about our coordinators, who they are, how they are really the ones that are going to be interfacing with you study participant during the course of your visits, both in the clinic and remotely. Then we get into, I'll introduce them to some of the team. If the team's not there, I will tell them about them. This is our nurse practitioner, Jaime Valles. This is our PI, Dr. Smith. This is our sub-investigator, Susan Harris. She'll be doing the psychometric rating scales. This is our lead coordinator. This is our community outreach specialist. Like, I will actually educate them on this so that they see that we are a team and not just people behind computers. Then we get into usually what's required of most studies, which are blood draws, ECGs, office visits, letting us access their medical history, their medical records, the reasons why we do this, how their data will be used. I educate them on the fact that their data is completely de-identified, meaning I introduce the idea of a screening number and a randomization number. I introduce them to the concept of what screening is, because a lot of times people still have cold feet even after I'm 7 to 10 minutes into this conversation. It still seems a little bit overwhelming, and I let them know, listen, you get paid for your screening visit anyways. You're going to get your labs drawn for free. You're going to get a thorough physical exam. You're going to probably get an ECG. Whatever particulars that study that they're considering has, you're going to get a thorough medical history. Then I get into stories of how research differs from medical practice and how, while this is not considered medical care, it is very thorough medical oversight and much more thorough than the majority of private practices allow. And it's completely different from our modern medical systems where it's churn and burn, like 15 minutes at a time and you're in and out. I let them know some visits, they are hours long, especially screening. Screening could be 1 to 3 hours long. Not every visit's going to be 1 to 3 hours. Some visits are 5 minutes, but some are 1 to 3 hours long. And this is why we look through everything. I let them know sometimes we've diagnosed things. We've found things that their primary care physicians or their regular clinicians didn't find because they're too busy and they don't do all the tests. And this is where, as a site, you start discussing the pros of your study, meaning if there's a lot of labs, which is a pro and a con, because a lot of patients don't like that many tubes being drawn, but you let them know what the pros are. Well, when's the last time you got a full hormone panel done in standard of care? Because you don't get that done unless you start having symptoms of certain things. Well, in this study, we do that as a default, and you get paid for it, and it doesn't cost you anything, and we don't care what your insurance is. And so patients seem to like this. And what really lowers the resistance and the barriers is letting them know your screening visit, because this is generally the case, we don't start any medication at your screening visit. Your screening visit is just to see if you qualify. It's a very thorough visit. We get your medical history, we get your labs, we get a good overview of who you are and where you currently are in your disease state with your medical condition. And then we will decide, along with the sponsor, whether you are a good candidate for the study. So if you're nervous about joining the study, you should still do the screening visit, because you can still withdraw at any time. And maybe we screen fail you, but maybe we don't. Maybe everything comes back and you are an appropriate candidate and we're ready to randomize you. And then at that point, you can decide whether you want to actually do the study or not. And another thing I let them know, these informed consents, they're thick. They're like 20 pages. Sometimes they're 40 pages. You're going to get a copy of this, but this is not a contract. because we're in a society where everyone wants you to sign a contract, and it's very easy to mistake an informed consent for a contract where we are holding you responsible for doing something. If anything, it's a one-sided contract. This is us disclosing everything to you about the study. You can quit at any time. If you sign this informed consent right now, and then 1 minute later you say, you know what, I changed my mind, you can do that. No questions asked. So that usually reduces a lot of the friction, and they see how thorough we are, and they see how much actually goes into getting drugs to market. And they have a great appreciation for this. And we've had success stories, crazy success stories of investigational product that have completely turned people's lives around, quality of life, daily functioning, and the drugs are still not out on the market. And this happened here in Yuma recently. So the only way that patients could have had access to that quote unquote treatment, even though it's technically not treatment, was doing the study. And even then, I let them know there is so much that has to go right for the FDA to approve the drug that they still may require more data, and they would force the drug company to do another trial or another long-term extension or another variation of the same study. And I think most people are not aware of this unless they work in the industry. And this is why it's so easy to fool people with the belief that drug companies are evil. And by the way, I'm very critical of big pharma for the most part. Like, you can watch my live streams and you'll see. And that's somebody that works in the industry. But because I work in the industry, I'm aware that they are not con artists and they're not out here falsifying data, because I would have seen it by now and I would not be involved in this industry if that were the case. And so, but most people don't know that. Most people just listen to sensationalism, and this is how you get misinformation. And I think a lot of people leave a clinical trial with a much healthier respect for the drug development process. And hopefully they also have a good experience with the study, or at least with the study staff, because you can't guarantee that everyone's going to have a good experience with the study, because maybe the drug does not do good for them, or maybe they get placebo. And we get into the concept of randomization, what that means. We get into how randomization works and how we are blind. I get into double blind and what that means and why that is the gold standard. I get into adverse events and how we really need to know everything about what's going on with you while you're in the study. And you are not going to be left alone while you're in the trial. And while it's not technically medical care, you will have never had better medical oversight and supervision than you will when you're in this study, because we are on top of everything. And if we miss something, the monitors and the drug companies won't. They will let us know, hey, I think you missed something. Have somebody take a second look at this, do an unscheduled visit. I explain what unscheduled visits are. All these things come into the conversation. And this is a difficult conversation to have. And imagine having this every day, multiple times a day. So you're going to start developing a pitch. And this could be as short as 2 minutes, or during a screening right before consent. I usually give this whole spiel, 10 minutes, leading up to here's your study, or subtly embedding the study into the story of what clinical trials is and what the drug development process is. So I think it's important that if you're a site and if you're a coordinator, you develop this pitch, not just for your studies that you have, because every study has their own nuances that you've got to kind of present, but the overarching theme of the drug development process and clinical research as a whole. Because I think there's a lot of misinformation, and the general public has no clue of how drugs come to market. They literally think that pharma can buy their way in by paying off the regulators. And that's just, there's a lot wrong with our industry. There's a lot of inefficiencies. You can even argue there might be some corruption in some places. But by and large, the data is collected at community sites based on study volunteers like you, and you can't fake the data. You can't fake the data at this size of a study. You might be able to get away with it with a small investigator initiated trial, and whenever there are cases of falsified data, it usually is at investigator initiated trials where it's literally one site getting a government grant and doing the study. But when you're at a community, when you're at multi-center, multinational study with thousands of patients, there's no way you can fake the data. And I let them know the majority of drugs fail. And the FDA has a very strict process for getting drugs through. And yes, this is experimental, but your medical oversight will be top notch. And we believe you'll have a good experience. And we believe that if you don't, we'll be the first ones to tell you this study's not for you and we'll take you out. And so will our clinicians, and so will the drug companies. So that's the conversation. That's how I approach the patients. Once they are in the study, you don't really stop the conversation, but you have to re-educate the patient on various things. Hey, here's why you have to fill out these diaries all the time. I'm sorry, but you have to do it, and this is why. We need the data. The FDA is very strict about us collecting this data. Is there any way that we can get you to be more compliant with this aspect? Or being compliant with study visits, or being compliant with taking the study drug. Communication's constantly needed in studies. Letting the patients know they have options. You can do an on-site visit. For some of our visits, we allow you to do a remote visit. For some of your visits, if you don't feel like coming to us, we'll come to you. We'll make it work. For some visits, we have some leeway. We have a couple days window. Sometimes we have a couple weeks window. But you got to let the patients know this stuff, and you got to communicate to the patients constantly. And when there's an abnormal lab value, you let them know. You let them know what the PI thinks. You let a clinician talk to them. You facilitate this as a coordinator. When the patient screen fails, please let the patient know why. Let the patient know what's going on. Sometimes the patients are scared, like, oh, why I don't qualify. There must be something wrong with me. You let them know there's not something necessarily wrong with you. It's just the way the protocol's written. Because you did not meet this is why you can't get in, but our PI recommends you do this, or you continue on this treatment with this doctor, or maybe it is the PI that is their clinician. Those are the ideal situations. So communication between site and patient is constant. It's not just to get them in the study and then that's it. And it starts with education, and then you take them on this journey where you're continually educating them, but on smaller and smaller things. So you're educating first on the macro of the industry. Then you're educating on a slightly smaller scale of the study. Then you're educating on the slightly smaller scale of study visits. Then you're educating on the slightly smaller scale of assessments per visit. And then you're getting into the nuances of where they're compliant and where they're not. And then their outcomes, their results. And when you follow this communication plan, patients generally are receptive and they're willing to refer friends and family. And those are the best kind of referrals you can get. And then the communication process starts again. And this is why it's very important that your coordinators understand this, that your coordinators are not overworked, because overworked coordinators tend to rush, and rushed conversation makes the patient feel like they're just another number. And that's the whole reason why patients want to do clinical trials, is to get extra attention as it pertains to their medical condition. So that's kind of clinical research in a nutshell. That's the pitch that I give to potential patients. That's the recommendations I give to all my staff, just how to communicate to the general public about what we do and particular studies. Let me know what I missed. Again, the most important part, your participation is voluntary. Everything that is known about the safety and efficacy of this drug that has been studied up until this point is usually this. This is why we're doing this study, to look at the long-term effects and to look at the exploratory endpoints. And this is your role as a study participant in the process. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Let me know what I missed. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.